Moses has passed, and leadership has now fallen to Joshua, who was and is this time Moses' longtime apprentice. Joshua, if you remember, first appeared in Exodus chapter 17, where he led Israel's army to victory over the Amalekites. We also see Joshua at the foot of Mount Sinai when Moses received the law in Exodus 24, and he's also near the tent of meeting as Moses meets with God. Exodus 33 says, as if face to face. Joshua was also one of the 12 spies sent to Canaan to spy out the land. If you remember that tragic story of Numbers 13, he was one of those few faithful spies. The Lord used Moses and all this time to prepare Joshua to be the leader of Israel. Now, after years of wandering, Joshua, here in Joshua 1, described as the new Moses, is to be the leader of Israel, the leader of God's people into the promised land. You remember the end of Numbers, they stood poised to enter the promised land right at the border. Deuteronomy was Moses' final charge to Israel, and now we have Moses passing the torch to Joshua, who in this book will enter the promised land. Main idea of the book: under Joshua's leadership, the Lord proves his faithfulness by bringing Israel into the land that he had promised. See the key themes here, short outline that we'll walk through for a few minutes. The book breaks into four major sections: crossing into the promised land, taking the promised land, dividing the promised land, and then concludes with serving the Lord in the promised land. So looking at these first 5 chapters, if you made your way to Joshua chapter 1, we see in the first chapter the book opens with Moses' death. God then gives his charge to Joshua, and then Joshua gives his charge to Israel. I'm going to read in summary fashion through chapter 1 here. I want you to see Moses' death here at the start, and then God gives his charge to Joshua as the new leader. Verse 1, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised Moses. Skip to verse 5. He reconfirms that charge and his presence with Joshua, saying, just as I was with Moses, so will I be with you. And God's charge to Joshua concludes in verse 9 with that well-known verse, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Joshua then, probably greatly encouraged, this charge from the Creator God, turns to Israel and gives to his people this charge. Verse 10, Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. He continues and concludes charge, to which the people answer in verse 16, all that you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. For once we have a unified, God-seeking Israel, all on the same page, ready to enter into the land. Chapter 2, you get the story of Rahab and the spies. I encourage you to read this story in your own time. A good story. I'll give you a short summary. Joshua, then, before taking or going to conquer the land, he sends 2 men to spy on the land of Canaan, especially Jericho, verse 1 says, and they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab. Now, this story is a good story, sure, but it also answers an important question that many of us likely would have about the book of Joshua. In the story of Rahab and the spies, These two spies approach the land of Canaan, specifically Jericho, you see here in verse 1, and they come across this lady named Rahab. And Rahab, rather than turning the men into the king of Jericho, she hides them in her house. And she does so because later we see, midway through the chapter, she says, I have heard of the power of your God. I've heard of his faithfulness to you and the way he has very powerfully and miraculously worked for the good of your people Israel. So what you see is Rahab, even a prostitute, looked down upon by society, a very sinful woman. She has seen of the power of God, and she here appears to show some sort of faith in him. That faith resulted in her protecting these spies of God's people. She says, I will continue to hide you if only you will not destroy me and my family when you come to take the land. And they say, if you will hide us and keep this secret, we will protect you. So the question that answers to me, looking forward specifically to the second part of this outline, is you see God sending Israel to destroy many nations, to leave no survivors, some accounts would say. And that raises question in our hearts, like how would God do such a thing? A couple thoughts there, and a couple things I think we see here in Rahab and the spies. One is God commanded Israel, Deuteronomy chapter 20, to live at peace as best as possible with all of the world. But he very specifically seems to exercise his judgment on Canaan through his people Israel. So you see, the Canaanites were a very sinful people. And when it comes down to it, they deserve the death and the destruction and the judgment that is coming their way. That judgment that God exercises through his people Israel. In the same way that we today are sinful people and we deserve judgment of God, but even all the more, the Canaanites practicing terrible sins such as child sacrifice and more. So what you see is God's judgment exercised on sinful Canaan through his people Israel. But the amazing thing that gives me comfort that you see in chapter 2 is, yes, God's perfect justice is exercised on the sins of the world, yet God's amazing grace is also displayed. This prostitute woman of all people, Rahab, exercises faith in God, and he spares her life, right? Welcomes her into the fold of his faithful people. You see that throughout the Bible. As Israel conquers nations and goes throughout their conquest, God regularly brings people into Israel who were not originally of Israel. So yes, God is perfectly just to punish sin, yet he also is amazingly gracious to the man or woman of faith. So you get that story of Rahab and the spies, which I think helps answer that tough question of how would God do such a thing to the Canaanites and to people. Then after that story, you see chapter 3 and chapter 4, God's people cross the Jordan and finally enter into the promised land. Chapter 5 is this time of ritual renewal. The people of Israel look back at God's faithfulness and renew that covenant and show that by way of circumcising the new generation. But at the end of chapter 5, there's this divine encounter. When Joshua, verse 13, was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And this man, this angel, replied to Joshua, no, I am a commander of the army of the Lord. Joshua fell his face to the earth and worshiped. So this is an important instance here in the book also. Before entering in conquest to take the promised land, he's entered the promised land with the people of Israel. Joshua sees this angel, this commander of the army of the Lord. And look what Joshua asks. Are you for us or are you for our adversaries? And the angel of the Lord answers, no. Basically to say, I am neither on your side or on their side. I'm on the Lord's side. And here you have something of a warning and an invitation of the angel of God to say, when you go to fight these nations of Canaan, you had better do so with your faith in God and do so according to the way that God prescribes you do it. Do it my way. You are invited to be on God's side. And the warning is that if you are not, things will go very bad for you. So chapter 5 is a big point at Joshua, in the book of Joshua, where the people look back, they renew covenant, and they look ahead with this warning and something of an invitation from the angel. The next portion of our outline sort of shows what I mean by this. They then move to take the promised land. Chapter 6, Israel defeats Jericho. They're in a display of God's faithfulness. Another amazing story of Israel circling the walls of Jericho time and again, playing the song, and God, in his faithfulness, helps them to conquer Jericho because they did what God said to do. But chapter 7, there's this nation called Ai. Not sure if I said that correctly, Ai. But Israel then, after defeating Jericho, due to God's faithfulness and their faithfulness to God, they fail to remain faithful to God. They move to sin, move away from God, and this nation Ai defeats Israel. So there you see that warning and invitation given by the angel fleshed out from chapter 5 in Israel's defeating of Jericho and then their being defeated because of their failure of faithfulness. Chapters 9 through 12, Israel learns their lesson, and the power of God is amazingly displayed in Israel as they conquer many nations to take over the promised land. Look at chapter 12. You see the power of God displayed throughout these chapters 9 through 12, but something of a stamp, a summary statement in chapter 12, verses 7 through the end of the chapter, verse 24, where king after king after king is listed. A list of the kings defeated by Joshua and Israel because of the faithful and powerful God working on their behalf and through them. So they've crossed into the promised land. Here they've taken over the promised land, and chapters 13 through 21 then shows the dividing of the promised land. These chapters, you can flip through them, skip to chapter 21, are very monotonous, right? It's a dividing of the land. This portion of land is for this tribe of Israel. This portion of land is for this tribe of Israel. And these chapters are those that it's hard to read. It can seem even boring to read. But for the ancient Israelite, getting this provision of land would have been an amazing showing of God's faithfulness and God's grace. God had promised this land to them for many, many years, and God has now proven true to keep his promise by helping them to take the land and then portioning the land to each tribe of Israel. Again, you see that main idea of Joshua. The Lord proves his faithfulness by bringing Israel into the land. Finally, the book concludes with serving the Lord in the promised land. Chapter 23, Joshua gives a final charge to Israel's leaders. Joshua was old and well advanced in years at this point. So you get a long look at Moses' life, and Joshua just gets this one book ascribed to his name. He's likely the author. And now at the end of it, he, like Moses, was old and advanced in years, and he concludes by giving his final charges to the people under his leadership, Israel. Chapter 23, he gives final charge to the leaders of Israel. And then chapter 24, here's where we will conclude. He then turns not to the leaders, but to the congregation, the everyday Israelite, and gives his final charge to them. It's a charge of covenant renewal. Remember that old covenant God had given to Israel. You be faithful to me, follow my commands, love me, and I will be with you and protect you and provide for you. Here, Joshua points back to that covenant and charges Israel to remain faithful. Chapter 24, verse 14, look at these verses in Joshua's charge. Now, therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But look at Joshua's final words here that we'll read. He says, you choose who you will serve, but I will make it clear, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. So Joshua's final charge, after God's great faithfulness to bring Israel into the promised land and to conquer nations they had no business fighting with, he says, choose to serve the Lord. Serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away all other gods and make that decision to follow and trust the loving provision and faithfulness of God. Move to conclude. You see that the name Jesus is a Greek translation of the Hebrew name Joshua. See that parallel not only in the translation, but the New Testament also draws parallel between Israel under Joshua's leadership and the formation of the church, or the new Israel under Jesus. The Lord's powerful working for Israel through Joshua is just a small sample of the much more real, powerful, and spiritual work he will for Israel and has for us accomplished through his son Jesus for our eternal salvation. Not just a temporary land or taking over of a nation, but he's accomplished our eternal salvation through Jesus, a foreshadowing of Joshua. And what we see for us today is just as the Lord was faithful to Israel to keep good on his promise and bring them to the land that he had promised, so will he be faithful to us always. Therefore, we should, like Joshua commanded, choose to follow him faithfully, trusting that he loves us, that he cares for us, and like we saw in the Great Commission on Sunday, that he is with us always, even to the end of the age. So that is the book of Joshua. We'll move to pray this word.